The invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a weapon disguised in cream-colored cardstock and elegant calligraphy. Elara Vance knew it the moment she saw it. Her ex-husband, the real estate magnate James Croft, was hosting a gala to celebrate his new engagement. He had personally requested her presence. It was a summons, not an invitation. A command performance for his own cruel theater. She knew he wanted an audience to witness her final humiliation, to see the quiet, supportive wife he'd discarded now living a small, unremarkable life. She went anyway, not out of foolish hope, but to retrieve the last piece of her old life he held hostage. She had no idea that by sunrise his world would be a footnote in hers. Elara Vance lived in a world of muted colors. After the divorce, she had moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet tree-lined suburb, a world away from the sprawling glass and chrome penthouse she had once called home. Her life was now filled with the gentle scent of old books and brewing tea, a stark contrast to the cloying aroma of expensive perfume and the metallic tang of ambition that had permeated her 14 years with James Croft. She had been the architect of his ascent, not in the boardroom, but in the quiet hours of the night. James was the face, the charisma, the ruthless negotiator. Elara was the mind, the strategist, the one who could see the subtle patterns in the market, the unseen value in a neglected property. She had a degree in art history, and a preternatural eye for aesthetics and structure, which she had applied to his burgeoning real estate empire. She'd identified the historic districts ripe for revitalization, sourced the architects who could blend the modern with the classic, and curated the art that turned his cold lobbies into spaces of breathtaking beauty. He had called her his secret weapon. Then once the empire was built and impregnable, the weapon was no longer needed. He'd told her she was lacking in public presence, that his new status required a partner who could shine under the lights. The woman he chose was Tiffany Sterling, an Instagram model 20 years his junior, whose primary skill was reflecting his own perceived brilliance back at him. The divorce had been swift and brutal. James's lawyers, a pack of silver-tongued sharks from the firm of Blackwood and Finch, had painted her as a simple housewife with lavish tastes, conveniently omitting her foundational contributions to his success. Exhausted and heartbroken, Elara had settled, taking only a fraction of what she was owed, just to escape the suffocating grip of his ego. She wanted peace more than she wanted money. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. The thick, creamy envelope felt alien in her simple mailbox. His new address was embossed in gold leaf, the Olympian Tower, Penthouse A, the highest residence in the city he now claimed to own. Inside the calligraphed script was a punch to the gut: James Croft and Tiffany Sterling request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their engagement. Her first instinct was to burn it. Why would he do this? It wasn't enough that he had taken her youth, her ideas, and her name. Now he wanted to parade his victory in front of her. She was about to tear it in half when a handwritten note fluttered out from between the folds. Elara, I know this is unorthodox, but I insist you come. As a gesture of goodwill for our shared past, I have something for you. A final piece of the puzzle. Consider it my parting gift. Don't make this difficult. J. She knew instantly what he meant. Her grandfather's watch. It wasn't particularly valuable in terms of money, but it was the only thing she had left of him. During the messy move-out, it had gone missing. James had denied seeing it, but she knew his tactics. He was a master of emotional leverage. He was holding her memory hostage, and the ransom was her presence at his triumph. Her best friend, a pragmatic and fiery lawyer named Maria, was livid. Don't you dare go, Elara. It's a trap. He's a narcissistic sociopath. He wants to hurt you to show everyone that he won. He has Grandpa's watch, Maria. Elara said, her voice quiet but firm. I can't leave it with him. It's like leaving a piece of my soul in his house. Then I'm going with you, Maria declared. No. Elara countered, a flicker of a forgotten strength in her eyes. This is something I have to do alone. I walked into his life alone. I'll walk out of it the same way. For the next few days, Elara prepared for battle. She didn't buy a new dress. Instead, she retrieved a simple, elegant midnight blue gown from the back of her closet. It was a dress from her old life, one James had always disliked because it wasn't flashy enough. It didn't scream for attention. It was confident in its own quiet beauty. She did her own hair and makeup, not the dramatic look James preferred, but a style that made her look like herself, intelligent, poised, and serene. As she took a taxi into the heart of the glittering city she had helped build, she didn't feel fear. She felt a strange, cold calm. She wasn't going to a party. She was going on a mission. Retrieve the watch, maintain her dignity, and then disappear from his life forever. She was Elara Vance, a quiet woman living a quiet life, and that was all she thought she would ever be. The elevator to the penthouse ascended with a silent, unnerving speed, a vertical launch into the stratosphere of the city's elite. When the doors opened, Elara was hit by a wall of sound and light. The cavernous space was a testament to James's ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree panorama of the city lights, making the guests look like gods surveying their domain from Mount Olympus. A string quartet played Vivaldi in one corner, while in another a white-gloved bartender poured champagne from gold-leafed bottles. The air was thick with the scent of money and insincerity. Men in bespoke suits and women dripping with diamonds turned to stare as she entered. Whispers followed her like the train of a gown. "Is that? I can't believe he actually invited her. She looks so plain." Elara kept her head high, her gaze fixed, ignoring the piranhas circling in the gilded tank. She spotted him across the room, holding court near a massive, abstract sculpture she knew cost more than her entire apartment building. James looked like a king in his element. He was laughing a booming sound designed to command attention. At his side, Tiffany Sterling clung to his arm, a vision in a sequined, backless red dress that left little to the imagination. She was beautiful undeniably, but it was a harsh, manufactured beauty, as cold and flawless as the marble floors. As if sensing her presence, James's eyes met hers across the crowded room. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He excused himself and began to walk towards her, parting the sea of guests like a dark messiah. "Elara," he said, his voice a low purr that used to make her feel safe, and now made her skin crawl. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look well." The faint praise was a calculated insult. He gestured to her simple dress. "Still favoring the understated look, I see. Some things never change." "Hello, James," she replied, her voice even. "It's quite a view." "The best," he said, turning to gaze out the window. "I only accept the best. You know that." He turned back, his eyes glinting. "Tiffany, darling, come and say hello." Tiffany glided over, her smile as bright and artificial as a searchlight. "Elara, it's just so brave of you to come. Truly." She looked Elara up and down, a flicker of disdain in her eyes. "James has told me so much about you." The implication was clear. He had told her all of Elara's insecurities, her fears, the intimate details of their life that were now just amusing anecdotes for his new lover. "I came for the watch, James," Elara said, cutting through the pretense. "All in good time," he smirked. "Business before pleasure. Or is it the other way around? I always get those two mixed up." He clapped his hands together, his voice booming. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" The chatter died down. The entire room turned to face them. Elara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, and her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the main event. "I'd like to thank you all for coming to celebrate my and Tiffany's future," James began. "But I also think it's important to honor the past, to close chapters properly." He placed a hand on Elara's shoulder. She flinched at his touch. "My former wife Elara is here tonight," he announced. "Many of you remember her. She was always in the background, a great supporter. But as my world grew, her vision unfortunately did not. We simply outgrew each other. He paused, letting the humiliation sink in. He was painting her as a provincial simpleton who couldn't keep up with his meteoric rise. But I am not a man who forgets his humble beginnings. He continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. And I know things have been difficult for Elara since we parted ways. So I wanted to give her something. A little starter kit for her new life. A waiter approached, holding a velvet tray. On it was a small, gaudily wrapped box. James picked it up and handed it to Elara. "Go on," he urged. "Open it." Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was not her grandfather's watch. It was a cheap plastic-strap digital watch, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore for $10. Laughter rippled through the crowd. It started as a few titters, then grew into a wave of cruel amusement. "Every great empire starts with learning how to tell time," James said with a wink. But he wasn't finished. "And one more thing," he bellowed. He gestured to the main wall where a magnificent painting hung, a newly discovered piece by the abstract expressionist Mark Rothko, a swirl of deep blues and melancholic purples. Elara had been the one to identify it at a small estate sale years ago, telling James it was the key to securing their financial future. It was now worth tens of millions. "Elara always had a good eye," James said. "She loved this painting, so I had a little something made for her to remember it by." He snapped his fingers. Another assistant appeared, holding a large, flat object wrapped in brown paper. He tore it open to reveal a cheap, pixelated poster print of the Rothko masterpiece. The kind of thing a college student might tack to a dorm room wall, so you can still enjoy great art even on a budget. James finished, his voice slick with mock sincerity. The laughter was louder now, sharp and piercing. Tiffany giggled, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. Elara stood frozen, the cheap watch in one hand, the tacky poster being held up beside the priceless original. It was a perfectly crafted tableau of her humiliation. He hadn't just divorced her. He was trying to erase her, to rewrite history and reduce her legacy to a punchline. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. She looked past James, past the jeering faces, and looked at the real Rothko. She remembered the thrill of discovering it, the dusty attic, the moment she knew she had found something that would change their lives. He had taken that moment and twisted it into this grotesque parody. She dropped the plastic watch back into its box and let it fall to the floor. She looked James directly in the eye. Her voice when she spoke was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the noise. "Where is my grandfather's watch, James?" He laughed, a final twist of the knife. "Oh, that old thing. I think Tiffany had it thrown out with some of your other old clutter. It was probably worthless anyway." That was the line. Not the public shaming, not the insults, not the theft of her legacy. It was the casual, callous dismissal of the one thing that connected her to a man she had loved and respected. It was the desecration of a memory. Something inside Elara, something that had been dormant for 14 years, finally snapped. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The laughter followed her, but it sounded distant now, like the buzzing of insignificant insects. She walked out of the penthouse, out of the building, and into the cold night air. The tears finally came, hot and furious. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, a cleansing fire. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with a newfound certainty. She scrolled through her contacts, past Maria, past her few remaining friends, to a name she hadn't called in 15 years, a name associated with a part of her family she had been taught to forget. The phone rang twice before a dry, papery voice answered. "Yes, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "This is Elara Vance. My mother was Eleanor Dubois." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice returned, imbued with a sudden, startling energy. "Miss Dubois, we've been waiting for your call." The name on her phone screen was Alistair Finch. It wasn't a name she had thought about in years. Alistair Finch was a name whispered in hushed tones during her childhood, a ghost from her mother's estranged family, the Dubois. Her mother, Eleanor, had been a gentle, artistic soul who had run away from a life of immense stifling wealth to marry Elara's father, a humble history professor. Eleanor had spoken little of her family, only that they were complicated and lived in a world of secrets and obligations she wanted no part of. The only tangible connection Elara had to that world was Alistair Finch. He was the Dubois family lawyer, a man of legendary discretion and loyalty. Before Eleanor passed away, she had given a teenage Elara a small sealed envelope. "If you are ever truly in trouble," she had said, her voice weak but insistent. "If you ever find yourself with nothing left and no one to turn to, you call this man. He holds a key for you. But I pray you never have to use it." For years Elara had honored that wish. Even during the ugliest moments of her divorce, calling him had felt like a betrayal of her mother's choice to live a simple life. But standing on the cold pavement, the sound of her own humiliation still ringing in her ears, she knew that moment had arrived. James hadn't just taken her home and her husband. He had systematically stripped her of her dignity and her past. He had left her with nothing. "Miss Dubois," Alistair Finch repeated over the phone, the formality a strange comfort. "I must confess I am both relieved and saddened to hear from you. Relieved because the terms can finally be met. Saddened because I can only assume the circumstances are dire as your mother predicted they might be." I need help, Mr. Finch," Elara managed, her voice cracking. "My ex-husband, I am aware of Mr. James Croft." Finch cut in, his tone turning to ice. "We have been monitoring his activities for some time as per the instructions of the estate. Let us just say his reputation is well documented." There was a rustling of papers. "Miss Dubois, or do you prefer Vance?" "Elara is fine," she said, feeling a strange sense of detachment as if she were watching a character in a movie. "Elara, the final codicil of your great-uncle's will was contingent upon one of two conditions: your 30th birthday, or your formal declaration of need. You passed the first milestone some years ago, but per your mother's addendum, we were instructed not to act unless the second condition was met. Your call tonight is that declaration. Can you be at my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? The address is 42 Old Willow Street." The address surprised her. It wasn't in the gleaming financial district where firms like Blackwood and Finch resided. It was in a quiet, historic part of the city known for its antique shops and cobblestone lanes. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'll be there." "Very good. And Elara," he added just before he hung up, "do try to get some rest. Tomorrow everything changes." Sleep was impossible. Her mind was a maelstrom of emotions. The shame from the party warred with a burgeoning, unfamiliar flicker of hope. She thought about her mother's words. "He holds a key for you." What could it be? A small trust fund. Enough to live on without the constant worry that nibbled at the edges of her peace. She didn't dare to hope for more. All she knew was that she had reached the bottom and the only way to go was up. The next morning she dressed with purpose. She chose a simple but well-tailored pair of trousers and a silk blouse. She felt a shift inside her. The woman who had meekly walked into James's party last night was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone forged in the crucible of that humiliation. The law office of Alistair Finch was as understated as its address. The sign was a simple brass plate polished by time. Inside, the air smelled of old leather, beeswax, and paper. The receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes, led her immediately to a large wood-paneled office. Bookshelves stretched from the floor to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound legal tomes. Alistair Finch rose from behind a massive oak desk. He was a tall, slender man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair and eyes as sharp and clear as a winter sky. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a university professor, the kind who taught the classics. "Elara," he said, his voice the same dry, precise tone from the phone. He shook her hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please sit." He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He retrieved a heavy leather-bound portfolio from a safe behind his desk and placed it between them. "Your mother was a wonderful woman." He began, his expression softening for a moment. "She wanted to protect you from the burden of the Dubois legacy. She saw how it consumed her brother, your great-uncle Alistair Dubois." Elara's breath hitched. Her great-uncle. She knew almost nothing about him other than that he was a recluse who had died before she was born. Alistair was a collector. Finch continued, his fingers resting on the portfolio. He did not trust banks or stocks, or even governments. He believed in tangible beauty, in things that lasted. During the economic chaos of the mid-20th century, while others were buying bonds, your great-uncle was quietly buying art. He opened the portfolio. Inside were not legal documents but high-quality photographs and certificates of authenticity. Elara leaned forward, her art historian's eyes widening in disbelief. The first photograph was of a painting she recognized instantly, one of Monet's Lost Water Lilies series, believed to have been destroyed in a fire in 1958. The next was a breathtakingly intimate portrait by Gustav Klimt, a study for his famous The Lady in Gold. Then came a sculpture by Degas, a rare Van Gogh sketch from his Arles period, a Picasso from his Blue period, and a Jackson Pollock that radiated chaotic energy even in a photograph. On and on it went. Dozens of masterpieces, not just from the Western canon but priceless ceramics from the Ming Dynasty, illuminated manuscripts from the medieval era, and artifacts from ancient Egypt. "Your great-uncle had a network of discreet agents," Finch explained. "He acquired pieces that had disappeared from public record, works lost during wars sold off in secret by desperate aristocrats or misattributed in minor collections. He kept them in a climate-controlled subterranean vault in Geneva, Switzerland. For 50 years the world thought these treasures were gone forever. He called his collection the Silent Gallery." Elara was speechless, her mind struggling to process the scale of what she was seeing. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me?" Alistair Finch looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Alistair Dubois died without a direct heir. He left everything in a trust managed by my firm. The sole beneficiary of that trust is you, Elara. You are the last of the Dubois line. As of this morning, when I filed the declaration of need, you have assumed full and total ownership of the Silent Gallery." He slid a final document across the desk. It was a valuation report compiled by a consortium of experts from Sotheby's and Christie's. Elara's eyes scanned the page, trying to make sense of the number at the bottom. The number had too many commas. What is this worth?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Finch leaned back in his chair. "The conservative estimate as of the market's close yesterday is approximately $2.7 billion, though frankly many of these pieces are considered priceless. Their return to the art world will cause a seismic shift. Elara, you are not just a wealthy woman. You are now one of the most significant and powerful figures in the international art market." Elara stared at the number, then at the photos of the masterpieces. She thought of James's mocking gift, the cheap poster of the Rothko he had stolen from her. She thought of him preening in his penthouse, believing he was the king of the world. A slow, powerful emotion began to rise within her, eclipsing the last vestiges of her pain. It was not joy, not yet. It was a cold, clear, and absolute sense of purpose. She looked up at Alistair Finch, the timid, heartbroken woman completely gone, replaced by the heiress of the Dubois legacy. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice steady and hard as diamond, "I'm going to need a new legal team and a public relations firm. I want to announce the rediscovery of the Dubois collection, and my first acquisition will be a controlling interest in the auction house that handles James Croft's art portfolio." The world found out about Elara Vance at 9:01 a.m. the next day. It wasn't through a whisper or a rumor, but through a coordinated global press release that hit every major newswire simultaneously. The Lost Dubois collection, the Silent Gallery, rediscovered. Heiress Elara Vance, to unveil priceless masterpieces. The announcement was an atomic bomb dropped into the placid waters of the art world and the high-stakes arena of global finance. Art historians wept, museum curators fainted, and billionaires who defined themselves by the art on their walls choked on their morning espressos. The name Dubois was resurrected from the annals of history, and attached to it was a name no one recognized, Elara Vance. The press release was a masterpiece of strategic communication crafted by the best PR firm Alistair Finch's connections could secure overnight. It included tantalizing images of a few of the newly discovered works, just enough to prove the claim's validity and send the market into a frenzy. It also included a short, powerful biography of Elara mentioning her art history degree, her quiet but influential role as a private arts consultant, and her lineage as the sole heir to the legendary collection. Her marriage to James Croft was mentioned only as a brief one-line footnote. Ms. Vance was formerly married to real estate developer James Croft. It was a clinical dismissive sentence that relegated 14 years of her life to historical irrelevance. In his penthouse, James Croft saw the news on a financial channel. His first reaction was disbelief. He laughed. Elara Vance, an heiress. The woman couldn't even balance a checkbook. This has to be a mistake, some other Elara Vance. Tiffany, scrolling through her phone, looked up with wide eyes. James, it's everywhere. The Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, even the celebrity gossip blogs. They have pictures. It's her. James snatched the phone. He stared at the professional headshot that accompanied the articles. It was Elara, but not the one he knew. The haunted, weary look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable confidence. She looked powerful. It was infuriating. His phone began to ring, a frantic cascade of calls from his business partners, his investors, the chairman of the museum board he had just joined. The narrative he had so carefully crafted of the brilliant tycoon, held back by his simpleton wife, was crumbling in real time. He was no longer the main story. He was a footnote. Meanwhile, Elara was not giving interviews. She was not basking in the sudden glow of fame. She was in a war room. Alistair Finch had assembled a team of the sharpest minds in finance and law in his firm's library. They were executing Elara's first command. Mr. Croft's art portfolio is leveraged. One of the financial analysts, a young man named David Chen, explained, pointing to a complex chart on a screen. He uses his collection as collateral for loans to fund new high-risk developments. The value of that collateral is determined by market confidence in recent auction prices. Specifically, he does most of his business through a boutique, highly respected auction house, Beaumont's. Beaumont's is a family-owned institution, Elara said, her knowledge of the art world clicking into place. Old money. They pride themselves on discretion and stability. Precisely, said Alistair. And like many old money institutions, they have been struggling with cash flow. A major infusion of capital would be seen not as a hostile takeover, but as a salvation. Elara's instructions were simple and devastatingly effective. Her new corporation, the Dubois Vance Foundation, would make a quiet, overwhelmingly generous offer to acquire a 51% controlling interest in Beaumont's. The offer would include a promise to respect the family's legacy and a massive consignment of several mid-tier pieces from the Dubois collection for their upcoming spring auction. For the Beaumont family, it was an offer they couldn't refuse, a golden lifeline from the most talked-about name in the art world. The deal was done in less than 24 hours. By the time James's brokers at Beaumont's called him, it was to inform him with great deference that the auction house was now under new majority ownership. And the new owner, Ms. Elara Vance, had requested a full review of all major client portfolios, particularly those heavily leveraged. James felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a targeted attack. The timid, background-dwelling woman he had mocked and discarded was now his boss in the one area where his reputation was most vulnerable. Elara's second move was even more audacious. She announced a press conference to be held not in a stuffy corporate office, but at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. she had arranged through a staggering donation to loan one of the collection's most significant pieces to the museum for public display, the lost Monet. The announcement sent a clear message. She was not a hoarder of wealth like her great-uncle. She was a custodian of culture, a philanthropist. It painted her as a figure of grace and public spirit, the antithesis of the greedy, self-serving image James had cultivated. For the press conference, she didn't choose a power suit. She wore a simple, elegant cream-colored dress designed by a young up-and-coming designer she wanted to support. When she stepped up to the podium, flanked by the museum's director and a beaming Alistair Finch, a hush fell over the room. She did not mention James. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke of her great-uncle's vision of the importance of art in a fractured world and of her mission to share these rediscovered treasures with the public. Her voice was calm, intelligent, and filled with a passion that was impossible to fake. "For too long these works have been silent," she said, her voice resonating through the grand hall. "My foundation's goal is to give them back their voice, to let them speak to a new generation." Watching the live stream from his office, James felt a surge of pure, impotent rage. She was erasing him. In the new story being written, she was the heroine, a patron of the arts, a woman of substance. And he was the fool who had cast a diamond aside, believing it was a common stone. Later that afternoon, Elara sat with Alistair in the now empty museum hall, gazing at the Monet. The swirls of paint were mesmerizing, a universe of color and light. "That was brilliantly executed, my dear," Alistair said, a proud twinkle in his eye. "You have completely controlled the narrative." Elara watched the way the light played on the canvas. "James's power comes from the story he tells about himself," she said softly. "The powerful mogul, the man with impeccable taste, the winner who sheds his weak past. I'm not going to fight his story. I'm going to write a better one so bright it casts his into shadow." She turned to Alistair. "Now for phase 2. I want to know everything about his finances, not just the leveraged art. I want to see the foundations of his real estate empire. My husband always said that every beautiful building has a weak point in its foundation. I want to find it." Alistair Finch smiled. "I believe my forensic accounting team has already found it." The Queen had made her opening moves. Now it was time for the checkmate. James Croft's empire was a skyscraper built on a foundation of sand. On the surface it was all gleaming glass and steel, the Olympian Tower, luxury condos, high-end commercial properties. But beneath it all, it was a dizzying labyrinth of shell corporations, high-interest loans, and dangerously over-leveraged assets. He was a master of illusion, selling the perception of wealth so effectively that no one bothered to check the vaults. Elara, however, knew where the vaults were. She had been there when they were built. The forensic accounting team Alistair had hired a group of quiet, ruthless number crunchers who operated with the precision of surgeons, laid it all out for her in the Dubois Vance Foundation's new headquarters. They had taken over 2 floors of a skyscraper directly opposite the Olympian Tower, a symbolic move that was not lost on Elara. "The key vulnerability is here," said the lead accountant, a sharp woman named Isabel Reed, pointing to a name on a flowchart, Project Nightingale. "It's his flagship new development, a massive eco-friendly luxury mixed-use complex on the waterfront. It's his legacy project." Elara remembered Nightingale. It had been her idea years ago. A vision of sustainable urban living with green roofs, recycled water systems, and integrated community spaces. James had initially dismissed it as tree-hugger nonsense, before realizing the immense PR and financial potential in green luxury. He had taken her concept and stripped it of its soul, turning it into another monument to himself. "The entire project is financed against his existing properties," Isabel continued, "but he's run into a problem. To complete the final, most profitable phase, the luxury residential tower, he needs to acquire one last small parcel of land." She highlighted a tiny square on the development map. "It's an old historic warehouse. The city's landmark commission has been blocking its demolition. James has been trying to force it through with lobbyists and backroom deals for months. Without that parcel, the whole project stalls and his loan covenants will be triggered." A cold, clear sense of purpose settled over Elara. Who owns the warehouse? Alistair Finch cleared his throat, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. It is owned by a small, discreet LLC named Cordelia Properties, an entity I took the liberty of setting up for the foundation last week. We purchased it from its previous owner, an elderly gentleman who was tired of Mr. Croft's bullying tactics. As of yesterday, Elara, you own the linchpin to his entire empire. For the first time since this ordeal began, Elara laughed. It was a genuine cathartic sound. It was so perfectly ironic. He, the great real estate tycoon, was being blocked by a single piece of property, and she was the one who held the deed. Her next moves were swift and silent. She didn't announce her ownership of the warehouse. Instead, she began to apply pressure from all sides, a multi-pronged attack designed to systematically dismantle his power base. First, Beaumont's. Under her new ownership, the auction house implemented a portfolio risk reassessment. It was a standard, if rarely used, clause in their client agreements. James's collection, which was the collateral for Project Nightingale, was officially reassessed. Given the new market volatility created by the emergence of the Dubois collection, its value was conservatively and legally downgraded by 20%. This triggered a margin call from his lenders. He needed to come up with a staggering $80 million in liquid cash immediately to cover the shortfall. James panicked. He tried to sell other assets, but word was already on the street. Elara, now a darling of the financial press, gave a carefully worded interview about her foundation's new focus on sustainable and ethically sound investments, subtly casting shade on over-leveraged dinosaur developers who prioritized profits over stability. The market reacted. James's credit rating dipped. The interest rates on his loans skyrocketed. Second, the art world. Elara hosted a private gala not to show off, but to build alliances. She invited the directors of the world's most prestigious museums, influential art critics, and the very cultural philanthropists James had spent years trying to court. At the event, she announced the formation of a new grant program funded by her foundation to support emerging artists and to restore neglected public monuments. She became a patron saint of the arts, overnight beloved and respected. James, who had used art merely as a financial instrument, was suddenly seen as a crass amateur. When the museum where he was a board member asked for a donation to their new wing, his check was politely returned. The Elara Vance wing was announced a week later. Finally, the warehouse. While James's lawyers were frantically trying to discover the owner of Cordelia Properties, Elara was working with the city's Landmark Commission. She hired the world's leading architectural preservation firm to study the old warehouse. Their report was a revelation. The building wasn't just old. It was a masterpiece of early industrial cast iron architecture, one of only 3 of its kind left in the country. Elara publicly petitioned to have it declared a national historic treasure, a move that would make its demolition legally impossible. The city, buoyed by the wave of positive press surrounding Elara, eagerly supported the initiative. The little warehouse she had bought for a pittance was suddenly on the front page of the architecture journals. The walls were closing in on James. His lenders were calling daily. His business partners were growing nervous. His social standing was evaporating. Tiffany, who had hitched her wagon to a billionaire, was becoming increasingly distant and irritable. The opulent lifestyle he had promised her was under threat, and her loyalty was only as deep as his bank account. He grew desperate. He started calling Elara. At first she ignored the calls. Then one evening, as she sat in her office overlooking his darkened, half-finished Project Nightingale, she decided to answer. "What do you want, James?" she asked, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "You bitch!" he snarled, his voice a venomous rasp. "This is you. I know it is. The warehouse Beaumont's. You're trying to ruin me." "Ruin you?" Elara replied, a touch of ice in her tone. "No, James. I'm just playing the game with the rules you taught me. You taught me that everything has a price. You taught me that sentiment is a weakness. You taught me that power is the only thing that matters." "What do you want?" he repeated, his voice strained. Money, is that it? Name your price for the warehouse. I'll pay it. Elara looked out at the city lights. It's not for sale, she said simply. Everything is for sale, he roared. What the hell do you want from me? I want you to deliver something to my office tomorrow morning, she said. Something that belongs to me. What is it? He demanded. My grandfather's watch, she said. And James, if it has a single scratch on it, I will not only let Project Nightingale crumble into dust, but I will personally finance your competitors and buy up every last asset you have until the only property you own is the suit on your back. She hung up the phone, the silence of her office rushing back in. The metamorphosis was complete. The timid woman who had cried on a cold street corner was gone. In her place stood a queen calmly and methodically dismantling the kingdom of the man who had wronged her, and she was just getting started. The next morning, a haggard, ashen-faced James Croft stood in the lobby of the Elara Vance Foundation. He clutched a small velvet pouch in his hand. The swagger was gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a man on the brink of collapse. He had spent the entire night tearing his penthouse apart, frantically searching for the watch. Tiffany, disgusted by his desperation, and seeing the writing on the wall, had packed her bags and left in the middle of his search, taking a significant amount of jewelry with her as a severance package. He eventually found the watch, not thrown out, but tucked away in a drawer of his desk, a trophy he had kept to remind himself of his victory. Now it was the symbol of his utter defeat. He was not made to wait. Elara's assistant escorted him directly to her office. The space was the polar opposite of his own ostentatious penthouse. It was elegant, filled with light classic furniture and a few carefully chosen pieces of art, not as investments, but because she loved them. It was a space that spoke of quiet confidence, not screaming ego. Elara was standing by the window looking out at his stalled Nightingale project. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. He wordlessly walked to her desk and placed the velvet pouch on its polished surface. "Here," he grunted. She picked it up, her fingers closing around the familiar cool metal. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She just held it, the last piece of her old life finally returned. She placed it gently to the side. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice even. "You may go now." He stared at her, dumbfounded. "That's it, I give you the watch, and you let Nightingale proceed." Elara gave a small, humorless smile. "Oh no, this wasn't a negotiation. This was you returning stolen property. The fate of your project is an entirely separate matter." "You can't do this, Elara," he pleaded, the desperation finally breaking through his pride. "I'll be ruined. Years of work, everything I've built." "Everything I helped you build," she corrected him softly. "You seem to forget that, James. You forget the late nights I spent analyzing zoning laws. You forget the design concepts I drafted. You forget the artists I discovered to give your cold buildings a soul. You didn't just discard a wife. You discarded your partner, your strategist, and your secret weapon. And you did it in the cruelest way imaginable." She walked around the desk and stood before him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "You humiliated me for sport. You tried to reduce me to nothing, a punchline in the story of your great success. You thought I was worthless. That was your mistake." "I'll give you a share," he blurted out, a sweaty sheen on his forehead. "A large share of the Nightingale profits. We can be partners again." The offer was so pathetic, so transparent, that Elara almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. "The time for partnership is long past," she said. "However, I am not a monster, James. Unlike you, so I will give you a choice." She gestured to two documents her legal team had prepared, lying side by side on her desk. "Option A," she said, tapping the first document. "You dissolve your company. You sell off all your assets in an orderly fashion to pay your debts. I will buy the unfinished Nightingale project from the bank for pennies on the dollar. You will walk away with nothing, but you will not be in debt. You will be free to go and start over somewhere far away from here. And option B, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Option B, she said, her voice turning to steel. You fight me. You declare bankruptcy. You get dragged through the courts for years. My legal team will bury yours in litigation. Every shady deal, every tax loophole, every lie you've ever told will be brought into the light. The press will feast on you. By the time it's over, you will not only have nothing, but your name will be so toxic that you won't be able to get a loan to buy a hot dog. You will be a pariah. The choice is yours. James stared at the documents, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This was the woman he had called plain simple and lacking vision. This was the woman he had mocked with a plastic watch. She had him in a perfect, inescapable checkmate. He saw the cold, hard logic of her plan. She wasn't just destroying him. She was offering him the only mercy he would ever get, and it was a mercy he had never once shown her. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow emptiness of defeat. He knew he had no choice. He had underestimated her on every conceivable level. I'll take option A, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor. A wise decision, Elara said coolly. My lawyers will be in touch with yours to handle the transfer. The press release from your company should state that you are retiring for personal health reasons. I expect it on the wires by noon. He didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out of her office, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. As the door clicked shut behind him, Elara finally let out a long, slow breath. She walked to the desk and picked up the velvet pouch. She opened it and drew out her grandfather's watch. The crystal was intact. The silver was tarnished but unmarred. She wound it, and the delicate ticking began a steady rhythmic heartbeat. A sound from her past, now a promise for her future. The empire of James Croft was over. The reign of Elara Vance had just begun. The news of James Croft's sudden retirement sent a brief shockwave through the city's financial circles, but it was quickly eclipsed by the announcement that followed. The Dubois Vance Foundation had acquired the stalled Nightingale project, promising to see it through to completion with a renewed focus on community and artistry. Elara didn't just finish the project, she transformed it. She scrapped James's plans for another soulless monument to wealth. The centerpiece was no longer a towering luxury spire, but the beautifully restored historic warehouse, which she turned into a vibrant public art center with subsidized studios for struggling artists and a free gallery space. She brought back the original green roof concepts, expanded the public parks, and mandated that a significant portion of the residential units be designated for affordable housing, creating a true mixed-income community. She commissioned a breathtaking sculpture for the main plaza, not from a big-name artist, but from a brilliant young talent she had discovered through her foundation's grant program. The project, once a symbol of James's greed, was reborn as a testament to Elara's vision. It was renamed the Dubois Commons. Her power was not in the billions she now controlled, but in how she chose to wield it. The silent gallery was no longer silent. Masterpieces were loaned to museums around the world, with a special focus on institutions in underserved communities. She used her controlling interest in Beaumont's not to crush rivals, but to create more transparent ethical practices in the often shady art market. She became a force not of destruction but of creation and restoration. She never saw James again. She heard whispers that he had moved to a small, forgotten coastal town, living a quiet life of anonymity. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Tiffany Sterling's fame fizzled out, and she was last seen promoting discount teeth-whitening kits on social media. They were characters from a book Elara had long since finished reading. One sunny afternoon, about a year after she had reclaimed her life, Elara was walking through the newly opened Dubois Commons. Children were playing in the fountains, people were lounging on the grass, and music from a street performer drifted through the air. She saw Maria, her loyal friend, sitting on a bench smiling. "Look at you," Maria said, as Elara sat down beside her. The benevolent queen surveying her kingdom. Elara smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. "It's not a kingdom, Maria. It's a community. She glanced down at her wrist. She was wearing her grandfather's watch. The silver was polished now, and its ticking was a quiet, constant reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. Her victory wasn't in James's downfall. His ruin had been a necessary consequence, the clearing of a diseased old-growth forest to make way for new life. Her true victory was this: the laughter of the children, the beauty of the public art, the thriving community she had built from the ashes of her pain. She hadn't just become a billionaire. She had become an architect of her own legacy, one built not on power and ego, but on purpose, passion, and a quiet, unshakable strength. The world had tried to make her a footnote in a powerful man's story, but she had become the author of a new, more beautiful story, all her own. And it was only just beginning. That is the incredible journey of Elara Vance, a woman who walked through the fires of public humiliation and emerged not just reborn, but reforged. Her story is a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars but in resilience. It shows us that the quietest voices often have the most profound things to say, and that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. Elara's triumph wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about reclaiming her narrative and using her newfound power to build a better world than the one she had left behind. If Elara's story of resilience and ultimate triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of turning pain into purpose, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of incredible real-life drama and inspiration. Thank you for listening.